right, so we continue again in this book, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees. Again, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes. And again, this book is from 1873. It says here, Section 1, Japhet. Now it says, the seven sons of Japhet, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, and Dodanam are traced by Josephus into Europe. He shows that their habitations were situated as follows. Beginning at the mountains Taurus and Amanus, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, and settling themselves on the lands which they light upon, which none had inhabited before, they called the nations by their own names. For Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians or Gauls. Now remember, these were the Simri, and remember, it's not the same. These Gauls or Galatians are not the same as the ancient, but we just read in the last book, so let's not get confused again. But at least we got a reference now of who the Sumerians mixed with and how they became known as Gauls. You know, so remember, I have a video on this, very thorough video actually, on the Descendants of Japhet, and specifying the Sumerians too. And that's part 2 of my Nations of the World series. So go ahead and check that out if you haven't. All right. It says Magog founded those that from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. All right. So we got to dodge the hijack.
Now, so why do I say dodge the hijack? I just like to remind you guys about the Scythians, right? We know the Scythians, a lot of them did mix with these Sumerians and Japhet people. But that doesn't mean they are specifically from Japhet and only Japhet. The Scythians were their own people. Who are the so-called Scythians? The so-called Sakai, so-called Saxons.
And we return to the book, Anacalypsis, an attempt to draw aside the veil of the Scythic Isis, or an inquiry into the origin of languages, nations, and religions by the late Godfrey Higgins. This is volume 2. 1836, and we go right into page 1. Yeah, go to book 1, chapter 1. We're gonna go in order here. It says here the Saka or Saxons. Okay, we already got a little bit of this drop in my series Israel and the Nations of Europe. We learned it comes from the phrase sons of Isaac. Remember, Isaac is a son of Abraham. I shall in this chapter submit to my reader some observations relating to the ancient Sakai of Tartary, or North India. Tartary, huh? We have seen in volume 1 on page 153 that one of the most common names of Buddha was Sakya. All right, this is a major drop. Now we kind of went over this a little bit in my series I mentioned earlier, but yeah, that's another name for Buddha, Sakya. He was a Saxon and son of Isaac. Buddha, the name of the Lama of Tibet, and Saka and Sakasa. Those were all his known names. From this name of Buddha, it was that the tribes who inhabited an extensive country east of the Caspian Sea and north of Tibet were called Sakai. This was the hive whose castes are yet found in the west called Saxons. All right, same as the Saxons. Having, as Dr. Gidi says, the Hebrew language. All right, the Hebrew language. We're in a whole other book. We got a whole nother person writing a book and also quoting the source. As you guys can see, we go to number 1. It says here, from Dr. Wade, I learned that there are an immense number of Chaldee roots to be found in the Sanskrit list of tattoos, okay? And Chaldee, very related to Hebrew. These Chaldee roots are Hebrew roots also, and are, I have no doubt, in a very considerable degree, the origin or base whereon the Sanskrit was built. Sanskrit comes out of the mother tongue too, so-called Hebrew. And we have actually read that in other books. Who are the ancient Nagas that went over to India, right? All right, so again, Saxons, their language is Hebrew, the Hebrew language. They were the Belgic Saxons of Gaul, Saxons, or sons of Isaac. One of their capitals was Soissons, all right, sons, Sois, the sons of Isaac. They were called Sausen, again, sons of Isaac by the Welsh, Sakon by the Scotch, and Sassenach or Saxenach by the Irish. They are the people said by Herodotus to be the same as the Scythians. All right. So real quick, just as a reminder, we're going to go over this again. It says here Anglo-Israel or the Saxon race proved to be the lost tribes of Israel in 9 lectures by Reverend W.H. Pooley. This is from 1889, and we go all the way to page 131. And it says here first, as to the name Saxon, the dictionaries say it comes from saxi, a short sword. But short swords or long knives were in use thousands of years before we hear of any such word as Saxon. In former times, this people were called Hebrews, then children of Abraham, then sons of Jacob, and children of Israel. But as we come down the stream of time, we find they are called sons of Isaac. In the closing books of the Old Testament, we find the new name. This also had been clearly revealed by God to Abraham when he made the promise, for he said, "In Isaac shall thy seed be called." How in Isaac? Drop the letter I, which is very common in the East, and we have Sak. The letter C is often found turned to K and often to X. So we have Sax, which with their termination ons gives us Saxons, Isaac's sons. We just saw that, right? Dr. W. Holt J says the word Saxon comes from son of Isaac. By dropping the prefix I and adding the affix ons, he gives us Saxen, and Saxon. All right, we just went over these two in the last book. He shows that in most of the Eastern languages, sons of is written Sunia, as with us in Scotland. Mac means son of, all right, and so on and so on. So in the East, Saxunia means sons of Sak or sons of Isaac. All right, you guys get it? So then he gives you a list of different nations that are basically the same people. They're known as all these different names, but it literally all means sons of Isaac. All right, so I just wanted to read this again so you guys can see. It's all the same. These two authors are saying the same thing. Let's go back to the book. So again, back in Anacalypsis, in chapter 1, they were called the Sausen by the Welsh, Sakon by the Scotch, all right? And then Herodotus says it's the same as the Scythians. Dr. Scheller maintains the whole of Europe to have been occupied by the Saxons before the arrival of the Celts. But listen to this. But they were in fact both tribes of the same people. Scythians, Celts, Saxons were successive castes or swarms from the same hive. If there were any difference, it was merely in the time of their arrival in the West into the British Isles. But it is probably that they were only different names for the same people, as the Britons are called English, Scotch, Welsh, Albanians, Caledonians, Cambrians, etc. The difference is their dialects. Is only what would naturally arise in unwritten languages in the space of 400 or 500 years. They were castes or swarms sent out in succession from a great and excessively populous hive in Tartary or North India. Remember where India Superior is. North America was part of North India or India Superior. Tartary, the country of the 1,000 cities of Strabo. They were exactly like the tribes sent out from Britain in modern times, at one time to America, at another time to Africa, at another time to Australia. They were the subjects of the only civilized nation on the earth. They took with them everywhere their manners, government, language, religion, and allegiance to their supreme head, as our colonies all retained their allegiance to the mother country. They at first nowhere found any of their own high caste, none in fact, but such persons as we found in America, aborigines as we called them, people original to the land. They met with no resistance, but by degrees as the world became peopled with the successors of previous tribes of their own countrymen, and land scarce, wars for possessions began to arise. This I shall discuss, however, in my next book. The word Saka is the same as the Hebrew word ske, imaginari, and skill, to contemplate, and the Greek, in short, mind, constantly confounded with wisdom. The skiakam of Georgius is probably sakakim, The root is sak, whence came sakel, wisdom, and our skill. All right, skill. All right, saka is sax, and sakal or sakel or skill, or cunning, or knowledge, or scientia, or wisdom, scientia, scientia. It all comes from what? The sons of Isaac. And any art is X or shaka, KL, which means the kal or wisdom of X. And KL is X 600, L50 equals 650. And the KLD is the origin, in its most remote degree, of the Chaldee or Chaldeans. Again, Chaldee, Caledonians, right? Chaldea, where is Chaldea? We're talking about ancient Chaldea, the real one. Check out my Ireland Ur of the Chaldee series. Caledonia, Chaldee, Chaldee, Chaldeans. I promise this explanation in book 11, chapter 1, section 1. Chaldee, wisely. Cunning, right? Wise, cunning, king, incarnation of wisdom or cunning. The origin of the root Saka or KL I shall show when I treat of the origin of letters. I have no doubt that this root is, in fact, the same as the SG, when come SGH in the Latin saju, and saga, a witch, and sagacitas, presagio, or English sage, sagacious, presage, and the Roman officer called sagard, who was the sacrificer, and the Hebrew sagan, the assistant or advisor of the high priest. From this came the word SLT, Skalit, the name given to Joseph in Egypt, and the meaning of which I apprehend was wise man. Joseph was called a savior, and this word is the same as salus, salutis. The barbarian who marched from the north and plundered Jerusalem was a Scythian or Tatar or Tartar. He was called Shesak. This is nothing but Saxon or Sassenat. He was a son of Isaac. Get it? Pat is a name of Buddha. Mohammed was called a Saka or Sakseswara, as well as Vikramaditya. These are all merely descriptive epithets. And from the fact name above, we find the reason why the Mohammedans spared the statues of Buddha in India. It strongly confirms the doctrine of the secret religion of the Mohammedans. Muhammad was thought to be a renewed incarnation of divine wisdom, and of course, of Buddha and his 10th avatar. In the time of the pharaohs of the Egyptians, had a class of persons called sages or wise men. Considering that Saka means Buddha, the god of wisdom, I cannot much doubt that the Irish Sagan or Sagan, a priest, the Scandinavian Saga or Saga, the Hebrew Sagon, noble or great man, are all the same. All right, it's all Hebrew. The heathen Irish had their Sagan, like the Tyrians and Chaldeans. Berosus gives the epithet of Sagan or Gisan to Noah. The Kohenia is the Hebrew word for a priest, a Kohen, and it is not unlikely that the Kaons, who are said by the Indians and Persians to have erected the druidical circles, had their names from this word. All right, again, these Kaons or Chaons are Kohen for priest. They were priests. That's all Hebrew. I think it probable also that the Kohen had a near relation to the Khan, and you already know that's right. Okay, Kohen is Khan, priest kings. Yeah, Kohen Khan comes from the same root. Shout out to Drop Nation. Khan Drop Nation already been surfing the wave. There is scarcely a corner of the globe where the doctrines of wisdom may not, as a mythos, be found. My learned friend Eusebi de Salberti has clearly proved that by the sagas of the Scandinavians, the books of wisdom are meant, the word saga being the same as the French sagis and the Latin sagas. From the same author, page 395, it appears that the Rasanai or Rasanui can be nothing but children of Ras, or wisdom. Ras. Thus, it is evident that to speak of the Sakae or Saxons was the same as to speak of the Buddhists. All right, it seems it's the same. It was the general name, as we call many sects of Catholics or Protestants, Christians. Who's the Protestants? From this, their sacred books were called sakas or sagas, as we call the books of the Indian Vedas or Vedas, or in fact, Buddhas or books of wisdom. This all agrees very well with the learned language of Kashmir or Kashmir, having been Chaldee, having been ancient Ireland, and it accounts for Dr. Geddes having found their language to be Hebrew. Again, so-called Hebrew going down to the mother tongue coming out of America. Again, the true old world. All right, so we continue again in this book, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees. Now, as to Javan and Madai, the sons of Japhet, from Madai came the Chaldeans, who were called Medes by the Greeks, but from Javan, Ionia, and all the Grecians are derived. Tobel founded the Tobelites, who are now called Iberes, and the Moshosheni were founded by Moshok, now they are Cappadocians. Of the three sons of Gomer, Ashanax founded the Ashkenazians. I remember Ashkenaz. That's the time about the Ashkenazis. The Ashkenaz founded the Ashkenazis. All right, they're Japhet, right? They're not from Shem. The Ashkenazi, who are now called by the Greeks Reginians or Reginians. So did Repab found the Riphians, now called Pathologians, right? Same people of these Ashkenazis, all right? And Trugrama and the Trugramians, who, as the Greeks resolved, were named Phrygians. Of the three sons of Javan, also the son of Japhet, Elisha gave name to the Elysians, who were his subjects. They are now the Aeolians, Tarsus to the Tarsians, for so was Cilicia of old called, the sign of which is that the noblest city they have, and a metropolis also is Tarsus, the Tau, being by change put the Theta. Because this account seems to us to reconcile with truth a good deal of what we have advanced in support of the names of places and people mentioned in the Old Testament being traceable through Europe, so we will leave it without comment, did it not, in our opinion, require to be viewed with a caution that comes of what we conceive to be more correct. The sons of Shem and Ham were with the sons of Japhet, or before, or shortly after them in Europe, whence they in part entered Asia. More of this after. If Japhet was, as we cannot doubt, the elder son of Noah, his family may be taken to be the oldest in the world. So the Celtic or Irish or Cymric language, which could not then have changed much, and the manners, customs, and the antiquities of Europe are the oldest in the world. I remember the Cymric and ancient Picts, they're not the same people, because they, again, we read in the last book that the Picts were eventually grouped as Celts, right? And they became known as Celts, and they got grouped with these Cymri that invaded, that came in much later. All right, so they're not the same people when they're talking about them here. The most ancient Greek and Roman writers agree to allow the Celts or Cymri or Gomerati to have been the primogenital family. But they are right about these people being very old. And again, My Nations of the World Part 2 goes heavy into them. They're the same as the Sumerians, but they're not the same as the ancient Picts, not the same as the ancient British or Irish people. So they wouldn't be the same people here. South of the Caucasian range, we find that the Cymri were called Gomrai. So it may be that the name Kurimeo is a corruption of the word Cymri. It is alleged by some that this section of the Cymri allied themselves with the children of Madai and became the Medes of history, and that another portion of them, separating from the main body, became Parthians, who in process of time became the Parthians or later Persians. I remember Persians, now they're saying in part because they don't sure, but they're a little bit sure because they did mix with these people. So the Persians were originally Elamites from Elam. Elam was the son of Shem, and these people did mix in with these Parthians or Cymri or Gomarians, all right?
So once again, guys, just to remind you guys, we're talking about Parthians, right, in this book, and she does great work, but she's a little confused with the nations. Many people are. All of us were. That's why I did this video here on the Parthians, which we're gonna continue our research in upcoming videos. So it's a good reminder now, a good refresh. Who are the Parthians exactly? They're not from Japhet. All right, this is from my video. We're gonna get it like it's the first time.
We're going to get into what this book is called Parthia, the forgotten ancient superpower and its role in biblical history. And then they're showing there's some technology they had. It's going to be talking about this by Stephen M. Collins. This is a Parthian battery. They're telling you a battery, huh? So we go into chapter 1 of this book. It says here, Parthia, an Israelite empire rises in Asia. Israelite. Oh, let's see what he's going to say. Many readers may ask the question, who or what was Parthia? I know a lot of you are saying, I never heard of these people. It is a testimony to the woeful lack of historical knowledge in the modern world that this question could even be asked. Parthia was a vast ancient empire which ruled in Asia at the same time that the Roman Empire ruled over the Mediterranean region. All right, so, we're to think that all this is happening only in that side of the world. Could it also be happening in locations in America, right? These empires ruling. Although Rome launched many wars of imperial aggression against Parthia, none succeeded in their arms of subjugating the Parthians. Conversely, Parthia administered many crushing defeats to Roman armies, as these two ancient superpowers opposed each other for centuries. In spite of the fact that much is known about Parthia's history, it is almost totally ignored in history texts. We shall now learn that modern man's neglect of Parthian history has led to more gross misunderstandings about the ancient world. These misunderstandings affect us today. The reader will see in the fourth book of this series how our misunderstanding about ancient history distort our perceptions of what is really happening in today's world events. Continuing, the Hebrew Israelite origins of Parthia. Who were the Parthians? There is no record of their presence in Asia at all until the Persians referred to them in the 6th century BC. And there is no mention of them in the Old Testament, or in the Assyrian inscriptions, or in the Zendavesta. The Persians called them the Pathva or Parthva, and named them as a subject people involved in a revolt in 521 BC. Herodotus mentions the Parthians as being one of the subject nations in the Medo-Persian army, which attacked Greece under Xerxes, the Persian king. So these were people that were subjugated. Almost like Israelites were subjugated, right? Herodotus also mentions that the Parthians were subjects of King Darius, and that they lived in an adjoining province to some of the Sakae. Those who have read the previous books in this series know that the Sakae were Scythians named after Isaac. Okay, we got a whole nother book. The Israelite patriarchs. I told you guys that Sakae means sons of Isaac. The Israelite patriarch. There's no other Isaac. Show me any other famous Isaac from his time period or before that. The Parthian homeland was located southeast of the Caspian Sea. The Parthians are clearly identified by historians as having a common origin with the Scythians. Rawlinson states there was a strong conviction on the part of those who came in contact with the Parthians that they were Scyths. And as the Scythian character of the Parthians is asserted in the strongest terms by the ancient writers. The previous book documented that the Assyrians exiled 2 waves of Israelite captives into Asia, and that some of them were located in the cities of Medes. After the fall of Assyria's empire, it is logical that some Asian Israelites would come under the dominion of the Medes and Persians. The above evidence that Parthia's language was half Median indicates that the Parthians had lived in very close proximity to the Medes for a considerable length of time. Some of Israel's exiles were placed in the cities of the Medes, 2 Kings 17:6, all right? It stated so, confirming that many Israelites would have lived among the Medes and become familiar with the Medes language. The last chapter of the previous book provided abundant evidence that the Sakai, the Scythians, were relocated members of the 10 tribes of Israel, sons of Isaac, since ancient historians affirm the Parthians were kinsmen of the Sakai Scythians, and since there is no record of any Parthians being in Asia until after the Israelites were placed there, it is evident that the Parthians were also part of the 10 tribes of Israel. The fact that ancient writers regarded them as a nation of exiles supports this identification. The 10 tribes of Israel in their Asian locations were indeed there as exiles from Palestine, or the real Holy Land, the real Canaan, America. All right. It has a map here showing a little bit of their area. The Arsacid dynasty refers to the Parthian kings. That the Parthians utilized an Aramaic alphabet, again, Aram, son of Shem, a Semitic, a Shemitic alphabet. Yeah, Aram is a son of Shem. Related to Hebrew, that's why it's related, because Arphaxad and Aram were brothers. They spoke the language that the peoples passed down to them, Noah, right? And the original mother tongue, which later also became known as Hebrew, confirms that the Parthians originated in the region of Syria and Palestine, or the real Holy Land, Canaan, where the Aramaic language developed. Their use of a Semitic alphabet clearly indicates that the Parthians had a Semitic racial and linguistic origin. Parthia, the Covenant Kingdom. One more smoking gun. Piece of evidence concerning the Israelite nature of the Parthian Empire needs to be presented. This piece of evidence concerns the name Parthia itself. In the previous book in this series, it was documented that the Hebrew word for covenant, brat, remember that Briton is people of the covenant, barat, the Barats in India, that's the same covenant people, was commonly used wherever the Empire of Israel was dominant. That's a big one right there. That's what we're going to get into. Brutus or Brit. This Hebrew word formed the basis for regions colonized by Israel. Britain and Brittany, or for migrating groups of Israelites, Brittonic Celts. It was noted that the Phoenicians' Israelite city of Carthage placed the Hebrew word BRT, or Brit, for its coin. In the ancient world, the letters B and P were interchangeable. Both are phonetically similar, labial consonants. In his book, Phoenician Origin of Britain, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons, we're going to get into this book more. We've read a little bit from it. Going to read the whole book, hopefully, or as much as we can, right? From L.A. Waddell, who's the Phoenicians coming from America, right? Includes Israelites and those so-called Phoenicians. He points out that the Phoenicians interchanged the B's and the P's in various forms of the word Brit. He lists many ancient forms in which the root word Brit was expressed. Words such as Barat, is what I was saying, guys. Barat, just like in India, Rat, and Britannia are just a few examples of words based on the Hebrew word for covenant. All right, literally, guys, get that, clear. Briton, people of the covenant. Briton, a Briton means person or people of the covenant. Waddell knows the Phoenicians interchanged the B's and P's in the Mediterranean world, and adds that the Phoenicians of Cilicia called the city of Tarsus Parthenia. Notice the similarity between the Phoenician Parthenia and the later Asian empire Parthia. Listen, guys, it's literally almost the same. It's the same word. So they can say that could be Parthia, covenant place. And it says here, Israelites, the covenant people. The Bible records that the tribes of Israel under Moses made a covenant with God. A promise, right? A contract. The Israelites retained the unique awareness that they were the covenant people as an enduring part of their culture. The Hebrew word for covenant, brat, was placed on people, places, and Phoenician, Carthaginian coins. The presence of the Hebrew word for covenant on ancient peoples or places is a strong identifier for locating where the 10 tribes of Israel migrated after leaving Palestine. Listed below are important examples. So it says here, Hebrew word for covenant, without vowels, barat, barut, berith, barat, like ancient name of India, barat, brith, brit, or berith, birthright, birthright, literally. Tribal and place names associated with migrating Israelites. It says here, Briton, Breton, Britanni, Brittonic Celts, etc. Place names, Britannic Islands, Brytia or Petritia. Greek names, Britannic Islands or Parthia. Brytia is Parthia. It's the same word. That's what he's telling you. The Encyclopedia Britannica confirmed that the Greeks interchanged P's and B's, recording that the Greeks referred to the Britannic Isles, the British Isles, as the Britannic or Britannic Islands. All right? Did you guys know that? Ailet Samis, a 17th century British historian, also noted that the B's and the P's were easily convertible in ancient context. So how many times does that happen with different words and history and places and people? Imagine. Think about that. In ancient context, right? It changes everything. Since it is documented that the Greeks interchanged P's and B's, their accounts of Parthia could just as easily have been written as Parthia or Brytia. In these forms, the Hebrew word for covenant, Brit and Brith, is clearly evident, representing the B as a P, and was done in the ancient world. The consonants of Berith, the Hebrew word for covenant, become Parth, the exact consonants of the word Parthia. The identity of the Parthians is no longer a mystery. They were the covenant people of the 10 tribes of Israel, and their very name declared to the world that they were the covenant people. L.A. Waddell, the author of the book cited above, understood that words formed from the consonants BRT identified the Phoenicians, but he never grasped that the Phoenicians were the Israelites. I've been trying to tell you guys, or that the Brit word designated the covenant people. Since his book contains Aryan racial themes, pro-white, Waddell never saw this self-evident fact because he was a white supremacist, because he's pro-bias Aryan, what he thought was white, racial. That's why he's saying racial themes. Waddell never saw, and this is what we get in a lot of these authors of these books. That's why I say dodge the hijack. They try to put themselves into it, like they try to, and make black skin inferior. Anyways, he also did not realize that the terms Jewish and Israelite were not synonymous. There you go.
All right, guys. So that's enough clips from that video. This one right here that I'm showing you. Make sure to get the full video that I did on the Parthians. This is the cover right here. Just put Parthians or Parthia and Kurimeo. You should find it, or just go through my video library. It's almost a 2-hour video, and I only showed you a couple clips. We're going back to the other book now.
All right, so we continue again in this book, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees. Another division of these people moving along the chain of the Apennines became the Cimbri or Umbri of Italy. These were the main stock which the Roman Confederacy was formed, made up of Latin, Samnite, Sabine, Marcian, and other nations. The Saturnian or Golden Age was during the Umbrian Empire of Italy, 1200 BC. The patriarchs of Umbria, both regal and priestly, became the gods of Roman mythology. The termination of words in Celtic and Latin differ, but it is curious how the root forms of the Latin are discoverable to be Celtic. The proper names of the oldest Latin families are formed on the Celtic basis, thus Claudius, Catulus, Cato, Pompeius, Lucullus, Camillus, Marcus, and the sewers of the Umbrian Rome and the Cyclopean fortresses and the temples were erected by Umbrian kings. The religion of the Umbrians was the Druidical or Patriarchal. The Tuscan or Etrurian Empire followed and was composed of the same Celtic element. The Etrurian may be said to have given way to the Gaelic interruptions of Brennus and Belinus. From the very earliest times, the country of the descendants of Gomer was known as Galatia, for Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now Josephus' time called Galatians or Gauls. The most remarkable portion of the Galatia alluded to by Josephus were Caledonia or Galadonia in Gaul and the province of Galatia in Spain. The Welsh of the present day pride themselves upon being sons of Gomer. There are many families of the names in England, but they are chiefly to be found in Wales. Again, remember, they're mixing a lot of these nations. They did end up going to Europe, the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland. These Cymri, descendants of Gomer, they did end up assimilating and bringing their religion and languages and beliefs and all their history into the Picts land and absorbing them and making them, basically go extinct from history, not as a people, but almost like a paper genocide back then. They invaded them, they made them, take on all their languages. And that's why, again, it was good to read the book we read before. All right, so again, I'm glad I read that book before. I have a little more better understanding how a Cymri, a Sumerian from Japhet could be considered these Gauls or Celts, and that had me confused when I did that video. I knew there was more mixture in there. I just knew it. There was more mixture. It wasn't just clearly them, and I knew they had assimilated with other people to become the Celts and Gauls, and this is a clear example. So I'm glad we got that perspective kind of cleared up a little bit. We're actually going to go more into that, definitely. Now I was going to talk about the descendants of Magog. Again, that was the Gomer descendants. So we're going to talk about Magog. It says it is not only general valency that makes allusion to the Irish being descendants of Magog. There is frequent mention made of this fact in the history of traditions of Ireland. Magog, or Sons of the North, as his name signifies, as in many scriptures references associated with the Isles of the Sea. Now, Javan, another son of Japheth, is Javan. The Ja modified into E in Welsh, the name becomes Even or Evans, one of the most numerous family names in Wales. All right, you see that? Ashkenaz, this Galatian son of Gomer, has been traced to Germany. Ascanians, all right, so that was one of the groups, right? One of the Celtic groups that were breaking down from Germany, Switzerland. They had a different type of skull. They were different than the actual Picts, right? So remember, these are different people, even though eventually they assimilated together and the Picts had to be called or take on their customs and be called Celts and all this other stuff. All right, so Ashkenaz, again, a Galatian son of Gomer, has been traced to Germany. Ascanians, the ancient Germans, were called and known as such by the Saxons. Ashkenes or Ashkenes is yet a proper name in Germany. It says Ripath, this other son of Gomer, like Javan or Ivan, seems to have bequeathed his name nearly in an altered form to the present Griffith of Wales. Togama, the people of Togama and his bands, invariably associated with Gog and Magog, are the people of the northern quarters, Scandinavia, and particularly Russia. All right, it says Eliza. Eliza was the son of Javan. Josephus says he gave name to the Elysians who were his subjects. They became the Aeolians. The Eleusinian mysteries originated with the sons of Elisa. To turn to the name as it is found in the British Islands, there are people called Elisa, or as the Welsh give it, Elias. Hence the names Ellis, Ellison, and Elisa and Elias were favorite names with the Hebrews, as may be seen in 1 Kings, it says here, chapter 22:6 and chapter 19:16, and Ezekiel 22:7. There is mention made of the Isles of Eliza. It says Tarshish, another son of Javan, was Tarshish. That the portion of Iberia, Spain, called Tarshish was named from his son of Javan, Josephus, as we have shown believes. When Josephus wrote, Tarshish must have been, from his remarks, a place of some note, but the Bible references to it prove this. Silver spread into plates is brought into Tarshish. Tarshish was dyed merchant with iron. Ezekiel, the ships of Tarshish shall sing of thee, Tyre, in thy market. Ezekiel 27, 25. And Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish. This is Jonah 1:3. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was not accounted of in the days of Solomon, for the king had a sea of navy of Tarshish. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. This is in 1 Kings 21, 1 Kings 10, 21 and 22. Now we go into Dodana. That's another son. It says, this, the last son of Javan and a Galatian, seems not to have left his name so as to be clearly discerned in these times. Nevertheless, it is capable of fair interpretation. Isaiah says, O ye traveling companies of Dedanim, This is in Isaiah 21:13, with evident reference to a nomad but yet semi-civilized people who several centuries before this settled in Ireland called the Tuatha De Danann. All right, that sounds almost like the tribe of Dan. So they're like mixing a lot of these Danites, most likely with the sons of Gomer, and that did happen. All right, the sons of Japhet, as we have shown, are constantly referred to in the prophets as the inhabitants of the isles. And in Genesis 5:10, we find, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations.